This is your 45-second call to Sunday school. I'm going to begin here in about 30 or 40 seconds. This is the point where the deacons are supposed to flash the lobby lights. Send a deacon to flash the lobby lights, please. Thank you for sticking around for this. If you're staying up with us, or even if you're not able to keep up with the Bible reading, we've been in Deuteronomy the last week or so. You're not quite finished with Deuteronomy yet, and I hope I don't spoil it for you. But we are going to discuss the end of the book a little bit today. I told you 2 weeks ago, I'm sorry I wasn't able to teach last Sunday. John, I appreciate you finding a pinch hitter for me. I'd forgotten that I had tickets to the Dallas Cowboys football game last Sunday. So, have you ever hooked your Bible app to your Bluetooth on your speakers on your truck and listened to the book of Deuteronomy for 3.5 hours while you drive down the road? I did that last Sunday. It's actually pretty cool. By the way, if you have not experienced that, I have found that listening to someone who has this radio, this majestic voice, read the Bible to me while I take notes to be very, very helpful. I like it. So I like to read it by myself as well, but sometimes it does change it up a little bit for you. So like I said, we're in the book of Deuteronomy. Once again, I love to teach. I love to learn from you. But another reason I love to teach is because it forces me personally into a discipline that I'm not very disciplined about. Because I learn more when I teach than I can possibly disseminate to you, or that we can possibly learn from one another. So I really, really enjoy that. We are going to use the Bible Project, their overview of the book of Deuteronomy this morning. The video is about 7 minutes long, but there is so much stuff in this book, brothers and sisters, that rather than me stand up here and regurgitate to you the things, the outline of the book and the things that are in the book, these guys sum this up so well. And their graphics are make it even more interesting. They're very, as you well know, we've used this material before. They're pretty simplistic, but it really helps to illustrate. But this book is very, very important to us as Christians. I want to point that out to you in the very beginning. Listen to the video very closely. I understand from Daryl that there's a book. You can buy a book from the Bible Project. I had no idea about that till this morning. So I'm gonna purchase that for myself for Christmas. Anyway, this book is so full of stuff. Let's let the Bible Project sum it up for us, and then we'll discuss a few things that they point out, and then I want to hear from you what you have gleaned in your personal reading over the last few days as well. Go ahead, Daryl.
The book of Deuteronomy is the fifth book of the Bible and the final book of the Torah. After the exodus from Egypt, Israel was at Mount Sinai for 1 year, entering into a covenant with their God. And then they had the disastrous road trip through the wilderness, and the Exodus generation disqualified themselves from entering into the land promised to Abraham. And so Deuteronomy begins with Moses standing in front of this new generation, explaining the Torah. And it's from here that the design and purpose of the book unfolds. Deuteronomy is a series of speeches from Moses where he's calling the next generation of Israel to be faithful to the covenant with their God. At the center of the book is a collection of laws, which are the terms of the covenant between God and Israel. Some of the laws are new, but many are repeated from the laws given earlier at Mount Sinai. And that's actually where this book gets its name, from a Greek word deuteronomion, which means a second law. Now, surrounding these laws are two outer sections of Moses' speech. Each of these are broken up into two parts themselves. Let's just dive in and we'll see how this whole thing works. So Moses, first of all, summarizes the story so far, and he highlights how rebellious the previous generation was, in contrast with God's constant grace and provision in the wilderness. And God did bring his justice on them, yes, but he did not abandon his covenant promises. After this comes a series of very passionate sermons where Moses calls on this new generation to be more faithful than their parents were to the covenant. He reminds them of the 10 Commandments, and then the centerpiece of this section is a famous line called the Shema. Moses says, "Listen, Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone, and you shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, and with all of your might." This became a very important daily prayer in Judaism, and it brings all of the themes of the book together. So the word listen, or Shema in Hebrew, it means much more than just to hear. Its meaning includes responding to what you hear, or in English we would say obey. And the word love in Hebrew also means much more than just an emotion or feeling. It's about a decision of wholehearted devotion to God that involves your will and your emotions, your mind and your heart. Now, for Israel, their obedience and devotion to God served a much larger purpose. Obedience to the laws is going to make Israel a unique people among the nations. Just like God said at Mount Sinai, they will become a kingdom of priests. And Moses now says, how? Israel has the chance, by following the laws, to show the whole world the wisdom and the justice of God. The other key idea in the Shema is that Israel was called to obey and be devoted to the Lord alone. Or literally, in Hebrew, it says, the Lord is one. Now, in context, the point is that the Lord is the one God Israel is to worship and obey. Israel's about to go into the land of Canaan, where people worship idol gods that represent all different aspects of creation, the sun, the weather, sex, and war. And in Moses' view, worshiping these gods degrades humans and destroys communities. But worshiping the God of Israel, who's the creator and the redeemer, that will lead to life and blessing. And so we come to the large collection of laws at the center of the book. And they're roughly arranged by topic. So the opening section is about Israel's worship of their God. They were to have one central temple where one God would be worshipped. And also, God was to be worshipped in Israel's care for its poor. So, for example, all Israelites were to set aside 1/10 of their annual income to be given to the temple. But another 10th was to be set aside every 3 years and given to the poor. And these are the kinds of laws that put Israel on the cutting edge of justice in comparison to their ancient neighbors, and it was all bound up with their worship of God. The next section outlines the character qualities of Israel's leaders. So the elders, the priests, the kings, these were all placed under the authority of the covenant laws, which God said that he would enforce by sending prophets to keep the leaders accountable. So in contrast to Israel's neighbors, where kings were thought of as divine and a law unto themselves, Israel's leaders were subordinate to the law and the prophets. Following this is a large section of laws about Israel's civil life, so rules about marriage and family and business, and also about social justice, about their legal system and how it was to protect widows and orphans and immigrants. And then these are concluded by more laws about worship. Now, here's some tips for reading all of these laws. Remember, first of all, these are the terms of the Sinai covenant given specifically to ancient Israel, living in a culture that's very different from yours. And so, two, it's not going to be helpful to compare these laws with modern laws from a very different culture. Rather, these were given to set Israel apart. And so we need to compare these laws with those of Israel's neighbors, like in Assyria or Babylon. And when you do that, all of a sudden laws that seemed harsh or bizarre become much more clear. You see that God is pushing Israel to a higher level of justice than was ever known before. And so finally, try to discern what core principles of wisdom or justice underlie any particular law, and you'll discover some really profound things. So here's an extra credit assignment. Go see how Paul the Apostle does this very thing in his first letter to the Corinthians, chapter 9, verse 9, and he quotes a law from Deuteronomy chapter 25, verse 4. It's really interesting. So back to Moses. After he goes through all of the laws, he issues a final challenge that Israel should listen to and love their God. He first issues a warning and an ultimatum. If Israel listens to and obeys their God, everything's going to go great, lots of divine blessing. But if they don't listen and rebel, famine, plague, devastation, and ultimately exile from the land. And then Moses forces a decision. He says, "Today I set before you all life or death, blessing or curse, goodness or evil. So choose life by loving the Lord your God and listening to him." But then Moses says this. He says, "I know that after I die, you're going to rebel and turn away from God and end up in exile." Which is kind of a downer. But then again, he's been with these people for decades, and it becomes clear that his hopes are not very high. But all is not lost, Moses says. One day, when Israel is sitting in exile, at any point, Moses says they can turn back to their God, who will, in his words, circumcise your hearts so that you may love him with all your heart and soul and live. Now, this is a vivid metaphor that's saying something is fundamentally wrong with Israel's heart. It's stubborn and hard. And it's the same thing wrong with the heart of all of humanity. This is going all the way back to the rebellion in the garden. Humans seized autonomy from God. They wanted to define good and evil for themselves, and they ruined God's good world as a result. But one day, Moses says, God is going to do something to transform the hearts of his people so that they can truly listen to and love God from the heart and be led back to true life. And this is the promise that gets picked up by the later biblical prophets, Jeremiah and Ezekiel, the hope for a new heart. So Moses ends his speech with a poem of warning and then of blessing, and then he walks up onto a mountain and he dies. And so the Torah draws to a close. All of the major plot tensions of the biblical story are in place, but left totally unresolved. So when is the descendant of the woman going to come and defeat evil? Or how is God going to rescue the whole world and bless all nations through this family? And how can God's holiness be reconciled with people who are continually rebellious? And how is God going to transform the hearts of his people? You just have to keep reading to find out. But for now, that's what the book of Deuteronomy is all about.
Okay, you want to go eat lunch? A lot in there, John. There's a lot in there. And I think they were flying at 50,000 feet rather than 40,000. So here we are. We have this book. We have this book that has a theme that's central to it, and it's about Israel's. First of all, where are we camped in this book? Where are the Israelites camped? He touched on it briefly, right at the very beginning. They're right there at the Jordan. They're ready to do what? Cross over into the promised land. I found one of the things I found very interesting while reading Deuteronomy that I had never, ever picked, a couple of things that I had never picked up on before. And one of them was that I guess I just forgotten this, or they didn't cover it on the flannel board in Sunday school. 3 tribes settled on this side of the Jordan. And I'm sure I knew that. I had been taught that at some point, or read that, but I didn't realize. So 3 tribes have settled right where they're camped currently. before they cross over. But we have this book with this theme of choice. Choice. Moses preaches this powerful series of sermons to the entire nation in this book. And throughout the book, and especially when he gets to the very end of the book, which you're probably going to be reading this week, there's this choice between life and death for these people. Blessings or consequences. And there's this theme in the middle of the book about this second giving of the law. This law that's about the love of God and the obedience to God, the fact that they are to have one God, one place of worship, no idols, obedience to God through reverence and justice and generosity. Several times in the book, that aspect of their worship was mentioned about the justice system that God is trying to establish through these people. That's so different than the land that they're about to enter into. A justice system that wants to ensure that the poor are taken care of, that the widows are cared for, orphans are cared for. This was, as was mentioned in the video, a brand new concept in the world at that time, the known world at that time. And he's trying to use these people, this great nation, to point towards him and his nature and his way of life. So I found that very interesting, that part of their worship and part of this new culture, this new lifestyle is going to be about worshiping God through your generosity. And of course, we teach that concept as Christians as well today. So Moses gives Israel a choice in this book between life and death, blessings and curses. And then the book ends. Spoiler alert, if you're following the daily Bible reading, it's an interesting ending to the book. He talks a lot about this choice between life and death. And he, as a prophet is to do, he prophesies that I know you people. I've lived with you a long time. You're not going to do what I'm asking you to do. You're not going to do what God is asking you to do. You're going to turn away from him, and God's going to punish you because of it. And then he does this interesting thing where he gives a blessing to every tribe. Very interesting. When you get to that chapter, pay very close attention to those words of blessing. He climbs up on top of a mountain. God says, there it is. There's the land that I've been promising you for hundreds of years. You and those who've gone on before you in this great nation. And then what happens to him? He dies. Who buries him? Wait a minute. You're going to learn. Don't forget that. Rewind. That's your homework. Who buried Moses? And your homework assignment is, who buried him? And what are the GPS coordinates of that grave? That is your homework assignment for this week. What have you gleaned so far from this book? What have you noticed? What have you found interesting? What jumped off the page at you? As I told you 2 weeks ago, I'm perfectly fine with standing up here and being quiet.
That points out early on in Deuteronomy is the leaders are not above the consequences of, I think that's really counterculture in a lot of ways to the way we live. And obviously the way that kings and leaders of people live.
John, you and I talked about a few things before class. What was one of those a couple of those that you found very interesting?
Well, pulling on Ben's comment, in a lot of ways, Moses is kind of a precursor to Christ.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at what we did Sunday here this Sunday with the communion, we're really reliving Passover, not the Passover that the Jews had or the Israelites had from Egypt, but the Passover of the Son of God dying and giving his blood to protect us. So in a lot of ways, Moses and Jesus are the same. They're both leading people out of captivity. They're both leading us out of slavery. And I was struck by Deuteronomy 9, and I hadn't seen it before. And this is Moses kind of retelling the story of the golden calf with more details than what we get the first time. And it says in verse 16, "Then I lay prostrate before the Lord." This is after he breaks the tablets and seeing the golden calf. He says, "I lay prostrate before the Lord as before, 40 days and 40 nights. I neither ate bread nor drank water because of the sin that you had committed in doing evil in the sight of the Lord to provoke him to anger. For I was afraid of the anger and the hot displeasure the Lord bore against you, so that he was ready to destroy you. But the Lord listened to me at that time." So you've got Moses kind of doing what Jesus does in the desert. And his purpose is that Moses is saying, I had to stand in the presence of God to keep him from destroying you. It makes sense that Moses doesn't go into the promised land because he doesn't fulfill what Christ fulfills. He is sinful.
Good point. Good point.
And there has to be a moment where you go, can anybody complete the task? And I think that's a beautiful thing for the way that this is laid out. But there are so many echoes in Deuteronomy of the gospel story, of kind of prepping this idea that we're not just talking about this, there's something bigger. This is like a play for something bigger that's happening. And at the end of chapter 9, it even goes on to say, Moses argued with God or pleaded with God, saying, if you destroy these people in the desert, the captors, which again we're talking about being released from slavery, that could take us back to the garden. He's saying they will know that you failed. And you will not get your inheritance, which is your people. And your people will die saying that you were evil and you were not good. Which is really the whole story of Job. Is God good? Does he love us? Does he want to live with us? Does he want to care for us? So there's so much wrapped up, and there's all these little whispers, if you will, in all of these passages that are saying something bigger is in the works.
Spoiler alert again. The book ends by saying, at the time this book was written, I'm paraphrasing, at the time this book was written, there has never been another prophet as great as Moses. And it was mentioned in the video as one of the unresolved questions. I'll throw that out there. In your knowledge of the rest of the Old Testament book, was there ever another prophet as great as the prophet Moses?
Elijah is compared to him even in New Testament scripture on the Mount of Transfiguration. So Elijah probably had the
Closest one.
Yeah.
I think the exception is that Elijah did not see God face to face. His experience on the mountain where he heard the whirlwind, he saw the fire, he saw all these things,
face to face.
Yeah.
If what John was saying, as Jesus as the new Moses, that's not even implicit. That's pretty explicit. So Deuteronomy 18 says, "From among your own people, the Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like myself." This is Moses saying, "That is whom you shall heed." And then Acts 3:22, Peter references that, saying, "Moses said, the Lord your God will raise up for you from your own people a prophet like me. You must listen to whatever he tells you." So that's something that was even obvious then.
They're connected,
Yeah.
obviously.
Yeah. That
Obvious
I guess is
connection. Thank you for
clearly
pointing that out.
referenced.
That's excellent.
He also, I mean, like, this is the understatement of a lifetime for both parties involved. No one can come at me afterwards for this. But Moses also took one for the team, like Jesus did, because at the end it ends with, like, in the last chapter, after whoever buried Moses. I'm trying to play along. It says. He was 120 years old when he died. His eyes were not weak, and his vitality had not left him, which means like he was still going strong at 120. But Israel couldn't move on and get their inheritance and their promised land until
He was
died.
not dead.
So he had to go up there and die for them to move on into the next phase.
I had not picked up on that, Jeff. Thank you.
That's actually Tiana. She's super smart.
So, yeah, there is this obvious connection between Moses and Jesus. Wasn't there an occasion where someone was asking the Pharisees, where we're talking among themselves, is this guy Moses or is he Elijah? Didn't that take place? Did I dream that in the New Testament somewhere? Roger, you're looking at me like I'm trying to. You can't recall where it was. Yeah. So.
I think that's why the transfiguration is so important in the New Testament. All three of those have seen God face to face. But yet, Christ is God himself. You know, Peter probably does what we all would do. Let's make 3 tabernacles for each of them. He doesn't understand that Jesus is far more superior. But it does show the weight of Moses for the law and Elijah for the prophets.
You've heard over the last few years the term social justice has become a real hot buzzword. But I don't know about the rest of you, but myself as a lifetime COC guy, you guys know what I mean by that, right? Okay. Yeah, I mean, as Christians, I have always been taught to, not saying I've always been very good at executing, but I have always been taught that the marginalized of the world, as a Christian, one of my duties is to help care in some form or fashion for the marginalized of the world. But some of that terminology and some of that activism, for lack of a better word, has somehow divided us somewhat. Am I resonating with anybody by saying that? I mean, but it's a theme here. That's another thing that jumped off the page at me over and over again as I read it, is the fact that this is, up to that point, a brand new concept. This is a concept to try to show God's nature through this nation. In this land where they're going, and where they have been, quite frankly, into this land where they're going that's totally different and a totally foreign concept to be concerned about those who are marginalized in the world. And you understand what I mean when I say marginalized. Specifically, in this context, it's about the widows and the orphans. But, yeah, that's one of the things that we should be about as Christians as well, right?
And that's why Jesus was so incensed every time he would go into Jerusalem or in the temple area that was not happening. that's what he was holding against the so-called religious leaders, because they should have known, or they did know better, and yet they weren't fulfilling it.
Roger, you and I talked on the phone a little bit this week, and you shared a few things with me. Was there any nuggets there in that that Roger and I go way back. I've always looked up to Roger as one of my Old Testament scholars, and a great Bible mind. And I've come to him many times with questions about what to do in certain situations. But you and I spoke on the phone a little bit, and you reminded me of some things that jump out at you during your study of this book.
Well, everything in Deuteronomy and in the law is conditional. There's always the word if. And in legal terms, when you come to that, that means there's conditions based on the promises. And so if you fulfill your love for me and your obedience for me, everything's going to be great. But if you do not, then these things will happen to you. And we know historically they did take place later on under the divided kingdom period, when the Assyrians invade, the Babylonians invade, take them off into captivity. But then again in Deuteronomy is the promise that a remnant will return. Key thing is that remnant that does return, to keep the seed line of Christ going until Christ is born about 500 years later. And so you have to just not look at the legalistic view of Deuteronomy. You have to see the spiritual seed promise. The laws were given to protect the seed line and the people so that they could be righteous and holy. And when they turn out not to be righteous and holy, God forewarned these people many, many times. That's what prophets were for. And God is not cruel in his punishment. He always gives you a way out if you choose to take it. But when you don't, his wrath will eventually catch up to you. So all that takes place in this writing. It's kind of a preview of what to come. You know, you go to the movies and you want to look at the trailers. You want to get there early enough to see the trailer. This is a trailer of what's to come. Mm-hmm. And so if you kind of view it that way, you can pick out all the different nuggets in there. Mm-hmm. And the breadcrumbs throughout there, and see what's going to happen in the future, and it does.
Yes, John?
I always think of the line that I hear from people when somebody exerts authority. Who does he think he is? Yeah. And I think it's a question we all have to kind of face when we read this book, when we get ready to read Joshua, and we start hearing about God saying, hey, I want you to go in and eliminate everybody from this town. I don't want to hear a sheep when it's over. And I think we have to be okay asking the question, who does God think he is? Oh, he's God. I mean, that's the rhetorical question, right? Does he think he's God? Well, God is God. Mm-hmm. If there's anybody that's God, I mean, this is God. And I think it's one of the hard things for us to wrestle with when God does things that we think are harsh or we think are too big of a decision for anybody to make. He's God. And maybe that's easy for everybody in this room. Maybe I'm the only one that sometimes goes, wow, that's a big call. But he's God.
Mm-hmm. Anybody in here besides me feel a little bit conflicted speaking of that absolute authority? Does anybody else feel conflicted when you think about the absolute authority of God? The fact that Moses promises these people, he prophesies to them, if you don't choose this, you're going to get this. And I want my Jesus and my God to be Santa Claus. Daryl and I were talking a little bit about Santa Claus earlier and the belief in Santa Claus, but I want my God to be that God of grace and love and mercy. And he is. But yet, man, He has absolute authority over these people. He wants a certain thing, a certain way of life, a certain way, absolute way of worship. And if you don't do it that way, oh, by the way, here's what's going to happen to you. And it comes true, doesn't it? It comes true. We're going to read more over the next few months about how everything Moses said to them.
I also mentioned to you, Vaughn, about how God works in the minute details. I mean, think of all the words in the book of Deuteronomy, how many letters, how many words there are in there. He's very specific. He doesn't leave anything to chance. Mm-hmm. So he's not keeping you vague or in a fog. I mean, it's black and white. And so when these things do take place, when you start reading about their captivity and everybody looking back when they're in captivity in Babylon, then they're going, oops. A lot of them are going, oops, we messed up. Mm-hmm. And that's why there's always a do-over. Mm-hmm. He provides a do-over every time.
When they turn their hearts around.
When Cyrus comes, king, right, and releases the people, and then Nehemiah takes place, that's the do-over. And there's still conflicts in the do-over. Mm-hmm. So they're hard-headed people, just like some of us we know. You know?
Yes.
Hey, Vaughn, it's probably worth looking at Matthew chapter 17 when you were talking about
Let's do it.
Elijah and Moses.
Let's do it.
I'll read just a few verses there. After 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John, the brother of James, and led him up to a high mountain by themselves. There he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as the light. Just then there appeared before them Moses and Elijah talking with Jesus. And he goes on to say in verse 5, and while he was speaking, a bright cloud covered them, and a voice from the cloud said, "This is my son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." And a little bit later, the disciples asked him, "Why did the teachers of the law say that Elijah come first?" And Jesus kind of goes on to say that Elijah really has already come, and they did not recognize him. And other comments about, don't tell anyone about all this until the Son of Man has been raised from the dead. So it kind of puts into perspective your comments before about Elijah and Moses and the relationship to Jesus.
Good stuff. What were some of the other unresolved questions? Do you recall at the end of the video what some of those unresolved questions were? A hint. When will the descendant of woman come to defeat evil? Genesis chapter 3. I mean, we know the rest of the story is Paul Harvey. Surely some of you know who Paul Harvey is, right? You've heard the rest of the story. By the way, they're all on YouTube if you want to go watch them. Yeah, we know who that. We know the answer to Genesis chapter 3, don't we? So how is God going to rescue the world? Genesis chapter 12. We know the rest of the story, don't we? How can a holy God be reconnected to a rebellious people? 2 weeks ago, we talked a little bit about that there's this whole system of the Israelites and their form of worship and the way the temple was structured, and there's this need for reconciliation. There's this need for God to be able to reconnect with a very rebellious heart like mine. You notice I didn't say yours, like mine. And praise God that He had that plan to fix that. I thought one of the questions that was asked was very interesting. How will God transform the hearts of His people? Many of you have read the rest of the Old Testament. If we're not quite there yet, but Moses, toward the end of the book, will prophesy about this very subject. How? What does he do? How does he transform their hearts over time, repeatedly? Through discipline?
And he's not just talking about, Moses isn't just talking about the coming of Jesus. I mean, he's really, a lot of this is just talking about finally putting an end to idolatry. You know, after the Assyrian captivity, we're finally done. But it takes Babylon, it takes, you know, it takes a lot of bad things before Israel's really ready to give it up.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know everybody's story here, but I think we all have things that we've held on to for far too long in our lives. But you see the patience of God, and you see his willingness to discipline, and you see the unwillingness of his children to take that discipline and his patience, because he's going to pull his kids to where they need to be. And he's not willing to let them stay in bad places.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I've said before, you know, is God good? Yes, because he's not willing to let people stay in bad places. And he's going to do everything in his power, and he has a lot of it, to move people forward.
Yeah, John, you're exactly right. His discipline changes their hearts over and over. And I personally believe that he still does that today to me. I've made some bad choices in my life, and I've suffered the consequences of those. Thankfully, none of them have been, you know, incredibly horrible. But, yeah, I've had to suffer the consequences of my bad choices. And,
I go back and we give Israel a hard time too much, like the people that fail. But like this overarching, it's a big plan, right? And the promised land is a very small part of that big plan. But to those people at the time, the promised land was the end all. Like that was, they have arrived, you know. And that was a huge thing for that 40 to 60 years of those people when they first got there and they say, yeah, y'all should see what we're in the desert. That's a big time for them. I think of that about that with us, because you say, you know, we take our Christianity as a very individual thing. You know, it's, yes, I have sinned, I have done this, I have done this. And it's, God has looked at this as a people and a plan from the beginning of when he started this whole deal. And it's for his kingdom, it's for his glory, it's for his, I mean, everything points to Jesus as our personal Savior, yes, but also for God's overarching plan, which is, I will be glorified, I will be praised. I think it's important to make sure that I understand when I'm reading that I don't take it as much of an individual thing as it is as a Christian. As a Christian, it is important that I fulfill my portion of it to bring about his will, and stop saying me so much and read it through the eyes of, you know, what does God want out of this deal, you know, for all of us. I don't know, it's when I read through this, that's kind of something that starts to stand out.
yeah, he does. He's trying to accomplish a very huge purpose through an entire nation, not just individuals, but through an entire nation. We have just about enough time, Daryl, to do this, to close out with this. But as was pointed out in the video, early on in this book, there's a song. There's a song that I've sung since I was a teenager, and it's the Shema. And I'd like us to sing the Shema as we close out Sunday school this morning. And then I want to, Ben, would you word a prayer for us after we sing? And we'll close out with that. Does that sound okay? All right. Hear, O Israel, the Lord thy God is one God, and thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all of thine heart, and thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all of thy soul, and thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all of thy strength. Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all of thy mind. Hear, O Israel, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself, and thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all of thy heart. Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all of thy soul. And thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all of thy strength. And thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all of thy mind. Hear, O Israel.
Father God, listen to us. Help us to remember these words we've sung to you this morning. Help us to remember the words that we have read or listened to from your word this week. Help us to contemplate and think and meditate upon your word. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. We'll see you on Christmas.
Tonight.
Or tonight, that's right.